I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. There are moments in life where time feels like it stops, like the universe itself has paused to let you soak in every detail. That was me when I realized my wife, Jenna, was cheating. 14 years of marriage, 2 kids, a solid home, everything shattered in the span of a few messages on her phone. The first hints were subtle, things that only someone who knew her well would notice. We were solid, or so I thought. Jenna and I had built a life together that most people would envy. Our friends called us the power couple, with her as a successful nurse and me running a small but thriving business. We'd met in college, started a life from scratch, and managed to stay grounded while raising our 2 kids. For years, I thought our life was ideal, that we had everything anyone could want. But looking back, maybe I ignored too much. It started with her late nights, the way she'd sigh heavily when she thought I wasn't looking, the faint whiff of perfume that wasn't hers when she'd get home. I remember one time asking her about the perfume as she casually took off her coat. She looked at me, unfazed, and said, "Oh, a nurse from the floor spilled her lotion on me by accident." I'd wanted to believe it, so I did. Little did I know, that was the beginning. There were other signs. She started picking more fights, over the smallest things. Things we'd usually laugh off suddenly became big deals, turning into arguments that left me puzzled and, frankly, hurt. The look in her eyes wasn't what it used to be. She seemed distant, like she was there in body, but her mind was miles away. I didn't want to be paranoid, I didn't want to be the jealous husband, but something about it all didn't sit right. Every night, I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was imagining it all or if my gut was finally telling me the truth. One night, after Jenna went to bed, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I'd usually ignore it, respecting her privacy, but that night something stopped me. A tiny, almost imperceptible instinct made me look at the screen. It was a message from someone named Joe Jim. Nothing seemed off about it at first, but as I looked closer, there were just too many messages from him. They weren't all innocent either. Phrases like, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow," and "Last night was unforgettable," stared back at me like poison on the screen. I put her phone down, my heart racing. I was hit by a wave of emotions, anger, hurt, confusion. I wanted to storm upstairs, wake her, and demand an explanation. But then I stopped myself. If she was lying, would she even tell me the truth? My gut said no. And honestly, I needed time. Time to think, to process, to figure out how someone I trusted with my life could be doing this to us. The days that followed were a blur. I started watching her more closely, noticing the moments she'd work late or head out for impromptu girls' nights. I couldn't shake the image of her phone screen, the words from Joe Jim echoing in my mind like a curse. I began putting together the puzzle pieces, looking back over the months and seeing every fight, every late night, every strange excuse, now laced with a new meaning. That's when I decided to start gathering proof. I needed something concrete, something that would take away any chance of her twisting the truth. Over the next few weeks, I logged into our bank statements, tracked her spending, and began taking note of any unexplained charges. I'd see a charge from a hotel downtown, right around the same time she'd been on one of her girls' nights. Another time, I noticed an unfamiliar restaurant charge, even though she told me she was working a double shift. I was seeing the signs everywhere, and the more I looked, the more it all started to add up. It felt like I was living a double life myself, one as her husband, smiling and pretending everything was fine, and another as a man discovering just how far his wife had strayed. Each day, I'd wake up beside her, feeling a mix of disgust and heartbreak. Part of me wanted to yell, to confront her, to demand that she explain how she could do this. But another part of me, a colder, calculated side, told me to wait. I wanted to hit her where it hurt, to make her feel the betrayal I was drowning in. Then one evening, she came home, her face flushed, her hair a little too perfect, like she'd just come from a date. She kissed me on the cheek, mumbled something about how her shift had been exhausting, and retreated upstairs. I could feel my blood boil as I watched her walk away. I had to remind myself to keep calm, that my plan was far from over. There was still more to uncover, and I wouldn't settle until I had every piece of evidence. I knew I had to stay strong for the kids. They were my only anchor, the reason I hadn't stormed out of the house or thrown her out right then and there. I knew the damage this would cause them if I handled it poorly, and they didn't deserve any of this. So, I kept up appearances, pretending to be the loving husband she once knew while quietly building my case against her. One night, I noticed she left her laptop on in the office. Usually, she'd close it, like she had something to hide. But that night, it was open, glowing on the desk. I hesitated, my heart racing with the thought of what I might find. After a few deep breaths, I walked over, telling myself I needed to know. And there it was, emails to and from Joe Jim, who, as it turned out, was no gym buddy but a guy she'd met months ago. Their messages were personal, filled with jokes I didn't understand, promises to meet, and memories they shared. They talked about places I'd never been, dinners she'd never mentioned. It felt like a slap in the face. Each word cut deeper than the last, but it also steeled my resolve. Now I knew. Now I had everything I needed. After discovering Jenna's affair, it felt as if I'd been plunged into an icy silence, one that echoed with every betrayal I'd read on that screen. I couldn't bring myself to look at her the same way, yet there we were, living together like nothing had changed. It was like wearing a mask, keeping up the act for the kids, for our family and friends, all while I planned what came next. In the mornings, I'd be up before her, making coffee, preparing breakfast for the kids, trying to ground myself in the routine. I'd hear her footsteps on the stairs, and I'd brace myself. She'd walk into the kitchen, give me her usual smile, and chat about her long shifts and endless paperwork at the hospital. Each word was like salt in the wound, knowing she was lying to my face. But I let her talk. I watched her lie, and each time, I added it to my mental list of grievances, waiting for the right time to confront her. One Saturday morning, I got my chance to dig a little deeper. Jenna had gone out, claiming she was going to a friend's for coffee. I had a few hours alone, so I took her laptop, still as it was when I'd last seen it, and started sifting through the files. I opened emails, read through old text conversations, scanned through social media messages I hadn't known existed. The deeper I went, the worse it got. In one email chain, she was describing sneaking out to meet this guy, detailing where they'd gone and how they'd spent the night. My stomach twisted as I read her words, imagining her living out these intimate moments with him, all while coming home and acting like our life was still intact. And worse, there were messages discussing our kids, her lamenting how trapped she felt by her family life, how she sometimes just wanted to run away. The sheer betrayal in those words made me sick. I'd dedicated myself to being the best father I could, believing we were building a life together for the kids, and here she was, throwing it away for this. I felt like I was becoming someone else, someone who could look at his wife and feel nothing but contempt. But still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. Every time I was tempted, I reminded myself that if I didn't do this right, she'd twist it, turn it on me, and somehow end up the victim. I wasn't going to give her that chance. Days passed, and I continued my routine, with Jenna blissfully unaware of what I was planning. I began to spend more time working from home, making sure I was around to observe her habits, to be present when she left for her late shifts or came home from her girls' nights. Each time she walked out the door, I'd log the time, and each time she came back, I'd note how she smelled, whether it was the lingering scent of her usual perfume or something new, some fragrance that wasn't hers. I knew this was obsessive, even unhealthy, but I needed proof. I needed to know everything. One night, about 3 weeks after I'd found the first messages, Jenna announced that she was going out with friends from work. She was dressed up, wearing a dress I'd never seen, her hair done up, with makeup she rarely wore anymore. The kind of effort she used to make for me back when we'd first started dating. I could feel the anger boiling beneath the surface, but I held my tongue. As soon as she left, I took her car keys, went to the garage, and started looking through her things. I didn't know exactly what I was searching for, but I figured I'd know it when I saw it. And I did. Tucked beneath the passenger seat, I found a small bag, neatly packed with toiletries, makeup, even a change of clothes. It was a go bag. A bag to stay overnight somewhere. I held it in my hands, feeling both rage and a strange relief. This was real, I wasn't imagining it. Here, in my hands, was proof of how she was living a double life, preparing to spend nights away without a second thought for what it would do to us. I put the bag back, exactly where I'd found it, careful not to leave any trace. As I stood there in the dark garage, breathing heavily, it hit me. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to dismantle her life, piece by piece, the same way she had done to ours. The next morning, I took our kids out for breakfast, just the three of us. We went to a small diner on the outskirts of town, a place Jenna and I used to go before the kids were born. They didn't notice much, they were too busy coloring on the diner placemats, but I found myself wondering how this would impact them. How could I spare them from the inevitable fallout? They deserved a stable home, not the disaster Jenna was dragging us toward. I knew what I had to do. I'd let her think everything was fine while I finalized my plans. I started visiting a lawyer, making arrangements, documenting everything, laying out the evidence. I told the lawyer about the messages, the hotel charges, even the go bag I'd found. She assured me that I had a solid case and advised me to continue gathering any evidence that might help protect my rights to custody. That meeting gave me the reassurance I needed. From then on, each interaction with Jenna became a carefully rehearsed performance. Every kiss, every "I love you" was measured, calculated. She thought she was playing me, but I was already 3 steps ahead. The irony was thick, and I almost felt sorry for her, not knowing that the life she was enjoying was hanging by a thread. Then came the night I'd been waiting for. I got a call from her, saying she'd be stuck late at work and not to wait up. I knew exactly what she meant, she was with him. I put the kids to bed, settled into my office, and started drafting the final list of everything I'd found, cataloging each piece of evidence, each betrayal. I printed it all out, tucked it into a folder, and laid it on the desk. Around midnight, I heard her pull into the driveway. I didn't rush, I waited, listened as she came inside, kicked off her shoes, and padded up the stairs. She paused in the doorway to our room, probably hoping I'd fallen asleep. I could almost feel the tension in the air, but I kept my breathing even, feigning sleep. She slid into bed beside me, and I could smell it again, the same cologne I'd caught faint traces of in her hair, the same scent from her late nights and girls' nights. Lying there, I knew it was almost time. Soon, she'd understand the gravity of what she'd done. She'd realize that I wasn't the clueless husband she'd thought she could deceive. In the weeks that followed, I played the part of the oblivious husband to perfection. Jenna went on, blissfully unaware of how tightly the noose was closing around her. I watched as she continued the charade, each lie fueling my determination to end things on my terms. One Friday night, I overheard her on the phone with him. She thought I was asleep, or maybe she just didn't care. I lay still, listening as she whispered about missing him and being together soon. Hearing those words made my chest tighten, but instead of anger, I felt a cool, calm resolve. It was almost over. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was emotional, every word a new knife to the life we'd built together. That next day, Jenna told me she'd be going out again, claiming it was another girls' night. I nodded, playing the fool, acting like the dutiful husband who trusted his wife implicitly. She spent extra time in front of the mirror, putting on her best dress, and made an offhand comment about needing a little time for herself. I nodded and feigned understanding, letting her think she had me wrapped around her finger. As soon as she left, I grabbed the folder I'd prepared, filled with every piece of evidence I'd gathered. I'd printed out messages, phone records, and hotel receipts, all meticulously organized. I double-checked everything, ensuring I had it all in order. I wasn't going to leave room for any defense or excuses. I wanted it all there, clear as day, so she couldn't deny a single thing. That evening, I arranged for my parents to take the kids for the weekend. I didn't want them around for what was coming. They didn't need to witness the mess that Jenna had dragged us into, the painful end of the life we'd all known. Once they were safely with my parents, I returned home, pacing the house in silence, mentally preparing for the confrontation ahead. Hours passed, and it was well past midnight when I finally heard Jenna's car pull into the driveway. I could feel my heart pounding as she unlocked the door and walked inside, humming softly, oblivious to the storm waiting for her. She turned on the light in the kitchen, her cheerful face freezing when she saw me sitting at the table, the folder in front of me, my eyes fixed on her. The color drained from her face, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. "Mark," she said, forcing a smile. "Why are you up so late?" "Sit down," I replied, my voice calm but firm. She hesitated, but the look in my eyes left her with no choice. She pulled out a chair across from me, her fingers twitching nervously as she sat down. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. I opened the folder, pulling out the first piece of evidence, a printout of her messages with her lover, complete with timestamps and details that left no room for argument. I placed it on the table between us, watching her eyes widen as she read. "I know everything, Jenna," I said, my voice steady. "Every lie, every betrayal, every secret you thought you could keep from me." She stammered, reaching for the paper, her hands shaking. "Mark, this isn't what it looks like." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Spare me the excuses. I have the messages, the receipts, everything. Do you really think you can talk your way out of this?" For a moment, she looked lost, like a child caught stealing. But then her face hardened, and she dropped the innocent act. "So, what? You're just going to throw everything away over this? A few nights out? A little mistake?" I clenched my fists, trying to keep my composure. "A mistake? You've been lying to me for months, maybe even longer. You put our family, our kids, everything on the line for this mistake. You betrayed me, Jenna. You made a choice, over and over again, to keep doing this." She scoffed, folding her arms defiantly. "Oh, please. Don't act like you're perfect. You've ignored me for years. Always working, always too tired or busy. Maybe if you'd been there for me, this wouldn't have happened." Her words stung, but I refused to let her twist this into my fault. "So, it's my fault now? My fault that you lied, that you chose to have an affair instead of talking to me?" She rolled her eyes, exasperated. "I don't expect you to understand. You never have. I needed something, and you were too wrapped up in your own world to notice." I stood up, slamming my hands on the table, anger finally breaking through. "Don't you dare put this on me. I gave you everything, trusted you completely, and you threw it all away." Jenna looked away, her face a mix of anger and guilt. "Fine, Mark. You're right. I messed up. But what are you going to do about it? Ruin our family? Walk away and make the kids suffer because of your pride?" Her words struck a nerve, but I wouldn't let her manipulate me any longer. I'd spent too long living in her lies, letting her control the narrative. I took a deep breath, regaining my composure. "The kids will be fine. They'll be with me. You can explain to them why you're not here, why you chose this path." For the first time, her expression faltered, genuine fear flashing in her eyes. You can't take them from me. They're my kids too." I held her gaze, unflinching. "I'm not taking them. You left us, Jenna. You left this family the moment you decided to betray us. The kids deserve better than a mother who lies, who sneaks around. They deserve a stable home, and that's what I intend to give them. She tried to argue, but I cut her off. It's done, Jenna. The divorce papers are ready. You can fight it, but we both know how that'll end. I've got everything I need, all the proof that shows the kind of person you really are. This is over. For a moment, Jenna looked like she might argue, might try to salvage something. But then she slumped in her chair, defeated, her shoulders sagging as reality sank in. So, that's it, she whispered, barely meeting my eyes. After everything, we're just done. I nodded, feeling the weight of years of trust, love, and loyalty slipping away. Yes. That's it. This was your choice, Jenna. You made it the day you decided to betray us. She sat in silence, staring at the table, her face a mix of regret and anger. I could see that she knew I meant it, that there was no coming back from this. I turned and walked away, leaving her sitting there alone with the wreckage of her choices. As I closed the door behind me, a strange sense of relief washed over me. The life we'd built was over, but so was the lie she trapped me in. Now, I could move forward, rebuild, and give my kids the life they deserved, free from the betrayal that had poisoned our home. The sound of her quiet sobbing echoed through the house, but I didn't look back. I'd given her enough chances, more than she deserved, and now I was done. It was time to start a new life, one built on truth, even if that truth had come at such a high cost. The days after Jenna left were both a relief and an ache I couldn't seem to shake. Life went on, of course, and I threw myself into it, finding purpose in the simple routines. The kids and I settled into a new rhythm, just the three of us. I thought we were healing. I wanted to believe that this was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild a life that mattered. Months passed, and we adapted. I'd try to distract myself with work, with parenting, anything to avoid the void Jenna left. The house was quieter without her, the kids spent more time with me, asking questions here and there, but mostly, they adjusted too. They'd stopped asking about her so often, and I thought it meant they were moving on, just like I wanted them to. One morning, I was in the kitchen, making breakfast, when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Jenna standing there, looking haggard. She'd lost weight, her face looked hollow, and her eyes were tired, as if she hadn't slept in days. My first instinct was to tell her to leave, to protect the fragile peace we'd finally found. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve anything from you, but, please, can I talk to you?" Against my better judgment, I let her in. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd confronted her, the same place where she'd lost everything. She looked around as if the house were a museum of her past life, her gaze lingering on the little details she'd once taken for granted. "I'm not here to try and change anything," she began, her voice shaky. "I just wanted to apologize. I know it doesn't change what I did. I know you don't want to hear it, but I had to say it. I ruined us, and I'm sorry, Mark. For everything." I sat there, silent, unsure of what to say. Her apology felt hollow, too late to mend the wounds she'd left. "What do you want, Jenna?" I finally asked, my voice harsher than I intended. She looked down, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. I wanted to see the kids. I know I don't have the right, but, just once, Mark. Please. I thought about it, about what it would mean for them to see her, to reopen wounds that were barely healing. But then I looked at her, and for a moment, I saw the woman I'd once loved, a woman who, despite everything, was still the mother of my children. I gave her a small nod. "All right. But don't expect anything more." She smiled, a sad, tired smile, and thanked me softly. That evening, she came over again, this time to see the kids. I'd prepared them, letting them know their mom wanted to visit. They were hesitant, confused, but they agreed. When she walked in, I could see the shock on their faces. Jenna knelt down, her face breaking into tears as she held them both, apologizing over and over. The kids were quiet at first, unsure how to respond, but eventually, they hugged her back, and for a moment, we were a family again. I left them alone, giving them privacy, hoping that whatever closure they needed, they would find it there. Days passed, and Jenna stayed in town. She'd found a small place nearby, just enough to stay close to the kids, at least for a while. They visited her on weekends, and though I still harbored resentment, I tried to let them have those moments, to give them a chance at some semblance of normalcy. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. One evening, after dropping the kids off at her place, Jenna called me. She sounded strange, like there was something urgent she needed to say. "Mark, can you come over? Please." I arrived to find her standing in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes distant. She motioned for me to come in and led me to the living room. "What's going on, Jenna?" I asked, noticing the shakiness in her hands. She took a deep breath, sitting across from me, wringing her hands. "I should have told you sooner," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "There's something I've been dealing with." I frowned, unsure what to expect. "Jenna, if this is some kind of—" "It's cancer," she interrupted, her voice cracking. "I found out, right after everything happened. Stage 4. They gave me a year at best." The words felt like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, struggling to comprehend. "How long have you known?" "Since the divorce," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to tell you. I thought you'd hate me more, that you wouldn't believe me. But it's real, Mark. I'm dying." A heavy silence settled between us. I wanted to feel anger, betrayal even, but all I felt was an overwhelming sadness. She looked at me, desperation in her eyes. I wanted to be there for the kids. I wanted them to have a mother, even if it was just for a little while. I swallowed hard, fighting back the emotions threatening to overwhelm me. She had destroyed us, yes, but she was still their mother. They didn't deserve to lose her, too. In the weeks that followed, I found myself doing the unthinkable, helping her through it. I drove her to appointments, helped her when she was too weak to stand, stayed by her side as she fought a losing battle. The kids didn't know the full extent of it, only that their mom was sick. I wanted to shield them, to let them believe in some version of hope, even as the days grew darker. It was a slow, painful decline. She grew weaker, her once vibrant spirit fading. She apologized every day, her voice softer, her eyes sadder. And though I tried to keep my distance emotionally, there were moments when I'd catch a glimpse of the woman I'd once loved, the mother of my children, and the anger would slip away, replaced by a quiet grief. One night, as I sat by her bed, she reached for my hand, her grip weak, barely a touch. "Thank you, Mark," she whispered, her voice faint. "For everything. For giving me this time with them." I nodded, unable to find the words. She closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek as she drifted off, her breathing slowing, her face peaceful for the first time in months. I stayed by her side, holding her hand until the early hours of the morning when she finally let go. The days after were a blur, filled with the quiet heartbreak of explaining her loss to our children, of helping them navigate the pain I'd hoped they'd never have to face. But in the end, we found a way through, leaning on each other, finding strength in the memories of her final days. As the years passed, the anger faded, replaced by a bittersweet acceptance. Jenna had made her mistakes, and so had I. But in her final moments, she'd shown me the strength I'd forgotten she had. And maybe, in some strange way, she'd given me a chance to forgive, to let go, and to move forward. In the quiet moments, when I think of her, it's not the betrayal I remember, but those last few weeks, the way she fought to stay, if only to be there for them, for us. And though it wasn't the ending I'd wanted, it was the one we were given, a reminder that, even in the darkest moments, there can be a flicker of grace, of redemption, if we're willing to see it.